Hello, everybody, and welcome to NETSOL podcast. My name is Farooq Ghauri, FG, and we are returning with lessons from the field. Today, I have a very, very special guest with me, Kamran Khalid. We've been working together for the last 20 years. Kamran has held a lot of positions in NETSOL, from heading our sales divisions, heading our development, heading our innovation, and has had these roles in multiple countries, delivering projects in Europe, in Americas, as well as Asia Pac. Hi, Kamran.
Hello, Farooq.
What are you doing currently, Kamran, for NETSOL?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's been 20 years with NETSOL now, and doing a lot of work in terms of product development, in terms of product innovation, global delivery, and lots of areas beyond the product and delivery around pre-sales and other stuff.
So today's topic on data migration, can you quickly just give us a little bit of your background in data migration and the kinds of things that you've seen?
In terms of data migration, in every project, when we go and start the project, one of the core element is around data migration, and that's where our core product, the performance of our product comes to reality. And that's so far like 300 plus implementations which we have done. 90% of these were with data migration.
Wow. Okay.
And the sources, there are multiple sources from where we have to transform into single and bring that into our product. And that's where the real value of the product is going out to the customers, because users would not be able to see the reality of the data until that whole process is completely transforms. Because over the years, they have seen so many, I would say, workarounds, so many transformations happening, so many business realities which have been applied into their legacy systems. And now all of that is visible to the business side suddenly. And that's the most exciting and transforming part, I would say, in the process.
So Karman, you just mentioned that out of 300 projects, 90% had data migration activities. Let's start our discussion with the 10% that did not have those things. And I'd like to start this part of the discussion by explaining that these are management decisions. These are objectives coming from senior management. And the main reason why companies decide not to get into this is risk. Right? They say, okay, we will not do data migration. We will run two systems. When you do that, you change one set of risks to another set of risks, right? So in our experience, we've seen when you don't do data migration, and let's say you're a mortgage company, right? You have a 30-year loan or mortgage on your old system while you're putting your new deals on your new system. So that causes a lot of data fragmentation problems. It causes reconciliation issues. You got to reconcile data. Otherwise, you're not giving good customer service. Your audit risk increases. So can you just tell me those 10% that did not do it, were any of these reasons there? Why they did not go for that data migration, if you could answer?
Okay, I would start from how I see migration. I call it more like a truth discovery activity. Okay. And usually organizations who are reluctant to get into the data migration are those type of truths which they are trying to avoid. Okay. And because it's the business reality. It's basically the behavior of the organization which you are seeing through that data, that legacy data, whether it's historical, whether it's analytical or other elements, it basically gives you that behavior there. Now, transforming that behavior into a new robust core platform while you are going through the digital transformation process, people do not have that kind of ownership in those organizations that who can take the ownership of the business side of it, that, okay, if the data is trustable or not. So that trust factor matters a lot during that decision making. And that basically keeps that segregation of between the organizations who take that decision and move forward, that 90% I was talking about, and then the 10% who do not take that decision and keep that running in the old platform.
Well, that's very interesting, Kamran, because there are so many dimensions to this. Because as you know, newer platforms use data better. So when you're not bringing in your old data into the new platform, you're actually missing out on insights and forecasting and stuff. But when you do it properly, the source of truth also becomes your future as well, right? Not just what I've done in the past, but then how do I adjust the situations in the future?
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. I have a few questions for you. Should we get straight into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess you've touched upon it briefly, but why is DM so critical? If you could just summarize it again, like why is that so critical in projects?
Okay, so looking at, again, as earlier I was saying about digital transformation, we are not fully transformed without data migration. And let's say, what is digital transformation? I mean, moving from one state to a new and better state within the organization. It involves having a new platform to be implemented, moving away from the legacy platforms there. Now, that new platform might be looking very good and shiny in the demos and all, but the actual performance of that platform comes in when the historical data or the legacy data on which the business was running, that is basically shown and demonstrated within that new platform. That's where the criticality comes in. And then in terms of the elements related, because in the industry we are in, it's highly regulated across the globe. And within the regulated markets, the cleanliness, the transparency of the data, and how the areas like customer records or accounting related elements or calculation related elements, cross modular impact of the data and all, how the transaction needs to be looked at. All of these elements matters a lot, that how the reporting to the regulators are going on, how customers are going to be invoiced or previously being invoiced and all. So all of these small things matters a lot. So that's where the criticality, and even that few decimal points makes a lot of difference in terms of customer experience, in terms of mapping into regulated elements, or catering to audit or legal related elements there.
Excellent, Karma. And then, with such a long record of data migrations, and I know our success rate is extremely high. I know our data validation verification rates are also extremely high. But can you just talk about a very easy data migration versus a not so easy data migration, to give the audience a flavor of the stuff you deal with?
Okay. So, I mean, there are two ways. I would not say easy or not easy in that simplistic manner, but at the same time, I would say there are different ways or different kind of scenarios which we have faced over the years. These scenarios come from where there were instances where there were more than one data sources from where we had to bring data in, whether Excel sheets, databases, DBMSs, or some obsolete files from where the data needs to be imported. Then adding to that complexity, no existing vendor was there. No support from the existing vendor was there.
No data structure, no data tables.
Okay. Nothing. And all these type of elements we had to deal with, our teams have to deal with, and go through the whole process, because it adds to the value. Because usually how people see data migration is that, okay, move from point A to point B, just extract the data, transform it, and dump into the new system. It's not that. It has to be there is a full methodical process at the data understanding level, because the sources have different elements. One of the interesting cases were that where during the project, and we were right in the middle, the 60-70% of the project was done, and we were moving towards go live dates and all. And at that time, regulations and certain types of elements were changed in that market, and customer decided to move from US GAAP to IFRS.
Okay, that's another level of complexity.
Exactly.
Wow.
And we had to do that also during that migration. So it's beyond just moving the data. It's basically we are transforming the business based on the historical data and all into the new standards and all, and has to be penny perfect as well. So all these elements these are some of the examples which I just shared. Now, handling of that part is another story.
Yes.
When you say the simplistic part of the data migration. I mean, we can create a staging environment and let the existing vendor put everything into the staging environment, which is completely mapped with the core platform, right? So that is the simplistic way to look at it. But from the business standpoint, from the organization standpoint, that complexity still remains. Actually, it added more because now they have to deal with two vendors to handle that migration as well. So there are different scenarios to do that.
That's excellent, Kamran. That's interesting. And then I think for our audience, if you could name 2 or 3 things that if you manage this, the rest becomes manageable, what advice would you give our audience?
I think first of all, not everything is important in your data.
That's excellent, yeah.
Because this is something that I personally think it's a myth. And yes, data is very, very important in the whole ecosystem. But there has to be a categorization. In my opinion, in these many years, how I categorize data in there are what is operationally required to run today, number one. Historically, what values, number 2. Number 3, legal side of it. What legal data needs to be available? Number 4 is about your analytically useful data. And everything else is obsolete. So we need to define based on that.
Focus on the target and not take data you might not need over. But would you take it later, Kamran? Would you focus on priority data and then worry about the secondary, or no? Just priority data?
Yeah, that's basically the approach now. One is categorization of the data that I explained, but the other is the approach itself.
Okay.
What kind of approach? You want to take a phased approach? You want to take and phases can be segregated in different manner. Like product-wise, you can transform the data first, moving from hire purchase to finance lease to operating lease and all. Yeah. The other element can be around your customer segmentation or any other such segmentation based on which you can you can do that. Other side is modular element is there. So phases can be defined. You want to go with phase-wise approach or big bang, both options are available there. And most commonly, which I have seen, the phases are which the organizations have seen or taking is basically moving active contracts first or active data first, and then bringing historical data in more phase-wise approach. That's another way to look at it.
Okay.
So that's
I know, Kamran, you had this project. I won't name the customer, but I know that they had 6 or 7 different phases to their data migration, right? They had 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers. That's how they categorized it. They had their different financial products, and they stepped the whole way. So I can understand that. Just moving to our next discussion point. What are the common consequences for weak migration capability? Let's say you're working with a partner or a vendor or even a customer, right? And they don't have strength in their data migration side, in their side. So what are the common consequences? Now, what I have seen, obviously, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Kamran, there's a lot of rework. There's a lot of repeated test cycles. There's a lot of delays. Obviously, when you do rework, when you repeat cycles, you can't control your timelines. And then finally, mismatching. I mean, those are the ones, but is there any others that you see?
Yeah. I think you pointed out rightly. These are the common ones. And the major thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that ownership part is something which is critical. What happens is that when you are at the start of the data migration, at that time you need to define the ownership of business validation of those rules which are going to be used to validate or reconcile the data at the time. So if you haven't done that stage properly, that will create a lot of consequences later on, and throughout you will be continuously in a
bad ripple. You're stuck in a bad ripple now.
Exactly,
right?
That's
bad
right.
Impact.
That's right.
Excellent. Security vulnerabilities, right? We've also noticed, Kamran, when things are not planned properly, then that's also opens up. Can you talk about some security issues or how you managed to deal with those?
I mean, there are elements where, from a security perspective, needs to be catered, whether it's data-related elements or because there are regulations. If we talk about GDPR or we talk about how to handle PII data for different markets, every market had different kind of regulation, but the base framework is same. And then from that perspective, you need to be careful that okay, how the data is transformed, and we are not violating any of those policies there. But during the transformation process, it depends that which phase or which approach you have taken, whether you are doing it from cloud to cloud migration, or you are doing it within the premises of the customer, and that kind of controlled environment is there, which is naturally more secured because you are not doing it over the internet and all. So these type of elements can also help in there. But there are tools available now which helps us to automate the process while keeping the whole transformation process more secured.
Well, that leads me to my next question, Kamran. Now, in terms of volume, right? Now, there is an ideal volume to do data migration. Is there an ideal manual way to do data migration, or it must always be automatic, must always be scripted? And then also, can you talk about your bigger data migrations with the larger volumes and your complex ones?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it is a decision point also at the time of when we are doing planning and all. It's a decision point also because let's say 1,000, 2,000 contracts are to be migrated. We do not recommend going through the whole migration process itself. This is something that where certain type of reviews and decisions being made with the customers that okay, we should go with the manual approach, and we have done that part also, and it's much easier, cost effective, and risk free creating those contracts manually within the core platform. I'm just taking contracts as an example. It's like the same set of transactions attached to that as well. But at the same time, automation is another angle because we have tools available which can automate the whole process, and that tooling mechanism is again tried and tested over and over years of implementations. Again, the same tried and tested tooling mechanism can fail if that ownership, that business rules definition, that business validity, all those elements are not being taken, and that cannot be replaced by any tool. You need to have human doing those type of things. You need to define those that ownership structure there. Looking at, from the size perspective, we have done millions of contracts transformations also, and where no vendor was available to support us, the existing system vendor.
From the other side.
From the other side, data was having huge anomalies in there, fragmented data was there. Then at the same time, calculation or numbers were not matching at some point. Amortizations we need to create on the go, on the fly, because old amortization data was not saved in the database. It was created on the screen on the run on real-time basis. So we had to create that also. There were a number of scenarios for such huge data migration related projects.
Oh, that's excellent. And I think on the smaller side, we sometimes use it as a training mechanism as well. If it's 1,000 contracts, 2,000 contracts, you can train the users to put that in. That's very interesting. Kamran, what advice would you give? Now, this is for our partners. How should they prepare? Is there anything they should do? Any advice you can give them to prep for data migration, build the right expertise in-house? Or you don't recommend right expertise in-house?
No, this is basically giving them advice from the perspective of, start early, number one.
Okay.
Do not think it's a background process that this will run in parallel to the rest of the migration and all. You need to start early on the data migration side, because when you are defining new processes, when you are in digital transformation phase, you are defining new ways of working as well. Your users are going to learn the change as well. At the same time, that data needs to be transformed accordingly as well. Like new processes, new workflows, new rules are coming into the core platform which you are changing. Your data needs to be transformed accordingly, according to that element as well. And then from the perspective of, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of the data, how that data is going to impact your digital transformation goals, that is key, that these things are openly talked between the business teams and the technical teams who are doing that whole migration related element. And then, of course, the suggestion for the customers or the organization who wants to transform the data would be different from the vendors who are actually doing that data transformation. And I would segregate it from one side is more about the ownership and defining business rules and defining and clarifying the objectives of that what you want to learn from that data and how do you want to use that. Whereas on the migration side of it, like the tooling and technology side of it, I mean, we should be taking benefits of AI also. But one thing I want to clarify here that AI will not be replacing governance, not at all. That human governance at the business side needs to remain, and that's where the organizations need to work on. Whereas the vendor side of it, AI can help mapping fields there, finding different type of anomalies, and giving you early view of what is missing in that data. All those type of elements which can reduce the time to decision, reduce your time of migration and all, and gives you efficiency like 30-40% of efficiency should be there. But governance needs to be with the human.
That's very interesting, and that's I think we should do a whole other talk on AI and governance. But just very quickly, Kamran, and one advice that I give our partners is when you're selecting a vendor, right? Select a vendor that will be useful to you in your condition, right? Some of our clients come in, they're doing a transformation. Some are coming in, they're in a nightmare project, they want to get out, right? Some want to slow down because COVID's happened. So one advice I give everybody is that when you're selecting a vendor partner, be careful of where you are and can they match your pace. What advice would you give to our audience on selecting the right vendors and partners carefully?
I think one of the key things is that vendors who are seeing migration as an organizational capability should be preferred over those who see it as a project by project thing. That is a very important element. Why I'm saying that is that now how things are changing in the markets and businesses, organizations are not sticking to their own current portfolio. During even the whole project is being done, you are live, you have new platform and all, organizations are looking to acquire more portfolios. Now, bringing in those portfolios would also require certain type of migration. Now, if that organization already has that capability in there, and when I say capability in terms of having migration accelerators, that whole framework there, those reconciliation templates are already available. Your staging environments are there, so that can be exposed. So that once the organizations acquire new platforms, they can use that capability to transform instead of going through the whole pain process of migration again. So avoid that part. That would be my core suggestion to these organizations looking in the vendors.
That's $1 million suggestion, Kamran. That's very, very impressive. I'm just going to now talk about one or two real-world examples. I think there was a case study in the UK, TSB Bank, I believe, and they were migrating, and they actually got the migration done successfully. But what they, in my opinion, where they made a bit of a mistake was the risk level on the other side. So when the data did migrate, Kamran, it was unable to be seen on the new system. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the internal cost, but there was a $40 million penalty to because obviously end users not having their financial data, all of that. You know how strict our environment and industry is. So that's one area where it's a real world case study. I would encourage our audience to go Google it, TSB Bank, and to really learn from their experience. And on the good side, there is Resimac. And what Resimac did was they did what you suggested. They started early and they built certain governance in-house, and they selected the right partner. But that's a good case study where they were able to do, it's a non-bank financial institution, but they were able to successfully migrate. Thank you very much, Kamran. That was very, very interesting points, and there was some very genuine advice that I'm sure that experts give to our partners. Just a quick question for you. What's your next big data migration or project coming up? What are you doing next?
So, in terms of projects, we are doing a very big program where multiple modules of wholesale, retail, and at the same time for 2 countries in parallel. There are 4 different systems from where we are migrating data and bringing into our modules, and it's a quite complex one. But we are using certain type of our migration accelerators and our framework, which already exists. So that is helping us transforming that rather quicker. In terms of innovation in data migration, we are moving into an element of API-driven migration approach as well to automate with the pipelines, cloud pipelines as well, so that we can make it more automated rather than using manual scripts and all. So that is another area which we launched just recently in our data migration projects.
Rama, I have one more question because of what you said. Now, you quickly spoke about a migration where you're doing multiple countries and multiple products.
Correct.
Is that normal, would you say, or is that something unusual?
I would not say it's completely unusual, but this is something that our major complex projects have these type of complexities where multiple currencies needs to be transformed. Also, at the same time, multiple countries and all. When we do in Europe, these complexities also adds on, and at the same time, when we are translating from one to another one, like I was mentioning earlier about accounting standards being changed or transformed. So all these complexities exist. Multiple languages needs to be transformed as well and the data is coming in.
Excellent, Karma. That was very, very good. And thank you very much, audience, for your time. Please feel free to reach out to us. We have been doing this since the 70s. We have a lot of experience migrating data from a lot of different systems. One funny one I remember we were doing in South America where we asked where the source of the data is, and they said it's his head. And I'm not kidding. The resource was called the dealers. The dealers would tell him how many quotes have come in. So if you wanted to know how many quotes and stuff in, that information was in somebody's head, in somebody's Excel, in somebody's email. So we've done a lot of usual ones and unusual ones, and we would love to speak to you about your challenges and your problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.